Welcome to another video. Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan, known as the Medieval Genie. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to do an unusual video. We're going to have a look at a reproduction rapier I obtained from someone at my historical European martial arts club for free, and we'll take it apart at some point and just use this as a discussion about what a rapier is, how it works, and how it changes the way that fighting happens, because people seem to think of sword fighting in a very sort of broad way, where it just is a bit that's sharp and it swings and it chops a guy open and that's it. And obviously you can use it in that way, but there are ways where it kind of helps you to fight in certain ways and it kind of becomes worse at fighting in other ways. So when we look at this rapier, for example, we've got a fair bit of back weight going on. We've got some weight in the pommel, we've got some weight in this basket hilt, and because it's so back weighted, I actually find that when I cut with it, there's less forward weight. So for the amount of weight that I've got pulling me down, there's less of it turning into a chop. This might be why people love those Viking style axes, because even the versions that aren't really that heavy, and most of them aren't, to be honest. You should see some of my test cutting videos I've done with a fighting axe that I made. Very lightweight, weighed less than half a pound, I think. And yet that heft and the chop just is murderous. This is the opposite. Instead of being forward weighted, it's actually very back weighted. And this basically changes the manipulation. Instead of the centre weight being around here, so then I've got this heft and I smash or I chop and bisect things. Because the weight is back here, it makes it very easy to move the point and manoeuvre it around. So if I want to stab something, that's fantastic. Having a weight on the end, it'd be like if I held it this the other way around, and then, oh god, just trying to move this around. I can barely move it, and I'm struggling, I'm straining, my arms get tired when I do that. So that change in the balance, even for the same weight of weapon, completely changes the way that you can best fight with it. And using this, it also has a different way in which you can use it to actually fight with. So if I take an object that's not got this complex hilt on it, this is what we call a swept hilt. More on that in a second. Here's something I made recently, because I seem to love forging weapons. This is a mace, so it's forward weighted. Ignore the length, obviously that's going to be a lot different, but just the general idea of the construction. It's got no guard on it, and it's forward weighted. So if I want to swing it at someone, this is fantastic for it. For so little weight, smash! It kills. But trying to manipulate the point, this is very lightweight, so I find it easy to manipulate at the moment, but it doesn't lend itself to that very well. There's this weight trying to sort of sling me about, and that is not very good for fine control. I'd really, if I was wanting fine control, notice here, if I want that fine control and get my point online, easier this way up with the weight at the bottom. Whereas here with the weight at the top, it kind of I want to go here and then it kind of pulls me here. I'm being travelled too far when I've got a forward weighted weapon. I prefer forward weighted weapons personally because I tend to use swinging and cutting types of actions most frequently. But that's not how you'd normally fight with a rapier. Now apart from that, we've got this lack of a guard mentioned. So if I was using a medieval style weapon like an arming sword, a mace, a Viking style fighting axe, or one of those types of weapons, I could start around here. This is the guard lady type of thing, so just, it's on my shoulder, whang! I hit someone, or maybe I can start here in the long tail, so the weapon is like a tail, it's trailing behind me. Oh, parry, whack! Or I can even go under. So it's really good for that. I can even start around up here, which is more if I've got a pointy weapon. So I'm starting retracted, and then stab someone. Now this is important because it doesn't work for you to keep your weapon forwards. You could threaten someone like this, maybe. I mean, as with all of these sorts of martial arts techniques, there are always ways in which things work and things don't work. You can never absolutely say, this will win a fight. It's kind of, well, try to do the best you can. I could threaten someone by having a weapon in front of me, but realistically, if I'm fighting and I've got my arm extended like this, I've got a fleshy target extended to my opponent, I'm basically giving them an opportunity for very little return for me. So if you're up against a person like myself who favours what I call hand carving, if you've got the arm in front of you along with the weapon, it means that you've basically closed a distance. If the weapon's retracted back, then to get a hit, any hit on the opponent, you need to be level, you need to be reaching as far as the opponent's face, their chest, their arm. So at that point you're going for these deeper targets. So you need to reach about this far to hit me. Whereas if I put my weapon forward, I've just given them several feet of space where they no longer need to close all the way to here. They can hit me from here. And these arms and hands, yes, of course, it's not as dramatic as beheading someone or stabbing their heart, but it's still a wounding action. They'll bleed. The opponent will also, of course, they'll suffer their ability to fight, because if you've been struck in the hands, the fingers, if you've been struck around the wrist, forearm, those sorts of areas, even as a person who personally doesn't want to rely on this idea of how much things might or might not hurt, there are always discussions about adrenaline and how much is a person feeling it and what if they're on drugs and all these things. But as far as I'm concerned, even if pain was never a thing, maybe you're up against someone who's got leprosy, if you've wounded them to the point where they physically can't use their weapon anymore, that's good progress to winning. Simple as that. So if you can physically disable the hands and arms and they can't fight with that weapon, then whatever it is you want to achieve, you know, buy time for people, arrest them because they're a criminal, kill them because you hate them or whatever, it's warfare, whatever, it's good to be able to get those hits anywhere, really. Any wounding action you can get for free, where you can hit them and not be hit. Great stuff. So this is where it changes when I've got a basket hilt, or in this case a swept hilt. So you'll notice if I push the blade out like this, look at this. It's almost like a shield, and I like the camera's perspective. If I'm back here, you can see as I'm extending out, there's this bar, and it's visually covering my face, it's covering other areas, and the closer that I get with this grip and the hilt, the more of an area is covered. This is the cone of defense, it's called. It's a strategy with shields. That's why if you ever see someone fighting a sword and buckler, a buckler being a smaller kind of fist-sized shield, or sometimes a bit bigger, that's why they often have the shield extended far outwards, because it's not so heavy that you might drop it anymore. It's quite light, you extend it out and you've got that coverage. Notice on my hand, extending out, and you've got more of your body covered. And instead of having to go and shoot across to defend yourself, when you've got the item already out, you only need little subtle movements, and in a very lazy way, you've got yourself covered. This works with the swept hilt of a rapier. So here I am with my rapier now, and I can make very subtle movements, I can make little adjustments here and there, and it covers different parts of my body as I see fit. And it completely changes the way you fight. No longer you've got your arms exposed and your hands, no longer have you got to worry about making dramatic movements. I mean, if I had, say, an arming sword or some other kind of medieval weapon, let's say I'm starting in some kind of normal position, someone attacks me, let's say they're going to cut into my ear on my left, or the cheek, so that's coming from your right, my left. So I've got to go, I've got to go and move the blade dramatically to stop that attack coming in, whether it's some sort of upright parry or a hanging parry, or I've got a shield. There's that more dramatic movement to stop their attack. Whereas with this, the rapier, oh, there's that attack coming in. Ugh. I just turn the blade inwards, and then I've made an automatic parry. And I should mention about the automatic parry, if I'm starting in a position like here, which in military sabre is called the inside guard, let's say someone wanted to go, again, my left ear or cheek, somewhere like that, want to give my beard a little shave of their sword. I'm here, and if I haven't done anything, and they've cut in that same way, I've parried it without going anywhere. Easy as pie. And the same thing here, which is on the outside guard. Same sort of thing going on if someone's attacking me from my right, which is your left. Automatic parry. It's very useful. And it also is extremely useful for stabbing an opponent. If I have a blade, which is more like a medieval style, so like I've mentioned, I don't want to have my arms extended out because they'll get cut off, so I don't have that hilt to block. So I'm starting from somewhere retracted, whether it's something of the point forward or not. When I'm performing the stab, I need to cover the distance from where I am back there, travel along, and go all the way over to where you are. Now, this isn't impossible, not at all. You can fight like this, by all means. There are people who like, for example, I enjoy with a two-handed sword to go into down here, which is called the boar's tooth. So the sword's on my offside, point down, and it looks deceptive. They think, oh, nothing's covered, but I can actually raise it into what I like. And this includes also, I can stab forwards. But I find that I'm aiming somewhere general, like their torso. I don't have such a precise aim. If my opponent had some sort of armour on, I wouldn't be quite so inclined to try that. Because I'm starting from somewhere retracted, I'm extending out with my arms and my body, and then making that thrust and trying to have some sort of accuracy when I'm going from A, long distance, to B, and hoping that it doesn't veer along the way. It's just like shooting, really. The further back you are, the less accuracy you have. So if I'm starting with my hands forward, let's say I'm aiming at the lens of the camera, and that's, say, the visor on a person's helmet, and I'm trying to aim in there and catch their eyes. If I'm starting from back here, I've got to really aim and make sure I'm covering that long distance and trying to keep the accuracy in the meantime. Whereas here, if my sword is extended out, I've got a shorter distance. Just extend out with a little lunge, bit of footwork, whoosh. I'm obviously not going to stab my camera because it's too expensive, but whoosh, extend out, thrust, easy stuff. And there are even people who, in Rapier, you can see, I remember seeing in some of the treatises there's an exaggeration of this. So you've got the longer blades which Rapiers tend to have, sometimes over 30 inches, extending out and really kind of putting the whole body into it, with the legs, with the torso, even a bit of leaning forwards that I tend not to like, and extending out the arms, and also bringing the shoulders, your front shoulder forward, your rear shoulder back, and having that whole straight line and extending all the way out for that long range thrust. But the thing is, with all of that, that is helped with this type of hilt. So it's really useful. And when we look at this is basically the way that the hilt developed. It's kind of like an expansion from the medieval hilt. So you can see, if you look at this bit here, this is a remnant of the medieval hilt. So you've got this crossbar, which is the original cross guard, and then you see certain designs, like certain falchions had this sort of bar coming down across the knuckles. You'd see some things like certain long swords and Zweihander, Montante types of two-handed swords. They'd have little side rings and things, so that might be where the inspiration for this bit comes from. You'd see things like the Langmesser and things like that with what's called the Nagel, the nail coming out, which is just a little bar coming out on the side where the wrist, not where the wrist is, where the knuckle is. And that extends out and adds a bit of protection. So they're little subtle elements, but as we head towards the Renaissance era after the medieval period, that's when it really comes into its swept hilt form, whether you're looking at the rapier or a side sword, or a mortuary sword, or those sorts of bigger hilts that cover the whole hand. And another important detail, so you'll notice there's kind of this looping around just over where that hilt is. That's not an accident. The reason why we've got a bit of the guard extending above what would be the original cross guard is so that you can put your finger over the guard. There were, I've heard, though I've never seen it in action, apparently some people who would put their index finger over the top of a medieval cross hilt. That helps to sort of align the point for a thrust and helps a little bit of control where you can manipulate it a bit more with your fingers. I don't like this because, as someone who likes hand carving and certainly does not want to receive a taste of his own medicine, putting any part of your hand over the guard means it's an exposed target. But it's perfectly fine with this type of rapier, and it means, yet again, we're looking at that control for the thrust, which is very useful for this. I will state that the rapier is not a thrust-only blade. It can cut. It's not like a small sword, which is definitely only for thrusting. You can cut and thrust. It's just that the rapier specialises more towards the thrust. So it's got the back weight, it's got that larger hilt, so there's more of that heft at the bottom, right down here, whereas some earlier swords might be more forward weighted, so you've got that chop and a heft. So when I cut with this rapier, for the same weight or more, I feel like less of that force comes into chopping the target. It needs more effort for the same amount of cutting power, even if you actually had an identical blade and just mounted it on a different hilt. You could take this same blade and you could make it better at cutting by just simply mounting it on a lighter hilt. Simple as that, because of the way the weight dynamics work. Now when I look at this particular recreation, it has a threaded pommel. This was done in the medieval and Renaissance era, not quite as much, and I'd reckon that there was a degree of, there was a lack of standardisation. So these days we have things like M number bolts. I've been for my work, doing an apprenticeship, researching into things like the EN numbers. You've got the International Standardization Organization or some stuff like that. And you have these codes and numbers and things like M5 bolts and all this, and EN42 steel. There's a lot of standardization. So obviously you've got a standardized size with this threading, which you could probably find, you know, like if I found a nut like this little thing I've got here, and then I could put it on the hilt. If I find one of that same size, then I could use them interchangeably. But obviously in the medieval and Renaissance eras, there wasn't as much standardization, so I would have had to make sure to either get the original blacksmith or get someone with enough skills and knowledge that they could adjust threaded items to this exact diameter. So when I look at this, so this is the complete unmounted sword. It's quite light, it's actually not bad, and when I hold it like this, so I'm holding it on the ricasso, that's the unsharpened part here, it does feel like it'd be a good chopping blade. You know, in terms of the weight and balance, and the flex, I like it, this is good. You know, again, this is a blade that could easily become a cutting blade, and of good quality. But with the way that this works, in fact, I'm going to, as an experiment, remount it, but without the rapier hilt on there, and just have the pommel and grip. But a key difference here is that, of course, it changes the dynamics of the fight, like I said earlier. So, with that lack of back weight, yes, this becomes better at the cut. This is a more unusual looking blade now, what is this? Obviously that makes it better for swinging around and chopping the target, and overall it has lost weight. However, in fact I can even do this. Take the pommel off, it's still held in place with the nut. It's rotating around in my hand, but the actual weight dynamics would make this a fantastic chopping blade. if it was sharp. But now, when it comes to manipulating for the thrust, when I move the blade, because it's more forward heavy, when I try to adjust, it kind of overcompensates. So let's say I'm moving from here too far to my right, your left, and I move it to here, in the middle. Thrust, catch your eye. Instead, I try to move and it kind of, I either have to adjust and sort of let it slow down before and then reach where I want to be, or I try to go where I want to be and then whoops, it kind of carries me along, which is not good. It's taking me past where I want to be. And this also happens when you're considering that, you know, you're an inanimate target at the moment. There's just a camera that I'm looking at you, the audience, through. And it's much easier because it's stationary. In a real fight, of course, people don't stand still. It's almost like they don't want to die or something. So, trying to achieve all of that while the target is actually moving and while the target's trying to fight, I found that when I try to perform a beat or a parry, trying to get the line for a thrust is possible, but it's more like I want to go into a static, I sort of want to prepare in what I think of as a more static position, and then so I want to go up into some sort of guard and then prepare myself and then try to take the hit without being offset too much. I don't want to go too far in resisting because I'll be away from the opponent. If I'm doing it too little, I'll be on the opposite direction. He might even get through, sort of crush through and hit me. So I've got to adjust it just right, take the hit, and then when I've got control of their sword, I then slide along and thrust. This is possible, but it's more like it becomes a two-time action. So it's defend, attack, and hope that their blade is still binding up with yours. If you can feel that contact, you know where the opponent is. I slide along, stab to the face, or whatever. With something like a rapier, having that back weight, it means if I did take a hit here, there's so much weight in this part that doesn't want to move, and there's so little weight in the tip that it doesn't, all of this is trying to take the force back here on the hilt. So there's less of that adjustment, less of that spring, and then I stab without having to do as much compensation. I'm not springing in as much from being hit. I'm not overcompensating when I'm trying to do a beat or bind. And again, without that forward weight, if I'm hitting into an opponent's, let's say they're doing the same thing, this extension to the hands are forward, they want to stab me in the face, I cut into their blade, trying to take them offline, then thrust at them. If I have a forward weighted sword, yes, it takes them offline easier, but when I do so, it does it too much, and it's taking my opponent away, and myself am going down with them, which means we're not really getting any advantage. I'd rather bind in and be pretty much, as soon as I've struck in, I want to be where I want the sword aligned, then easy thrust afterwards. So this sort of rapier blade lends itself to it. Now I don't know who the manufacturer of this specific blade is, but it seems to have some flex tempering in the sword. There are some little wonky, gammy looking bits I'll try to show you. Some of it looks a little bit kind of off. Maybe it's been used a bit and it's been beaten. I mean, there are very chewed up edges, so this has been very thoroughly used. In fact, I now know that the sword is on back to front because, of course, people don't use the back edge very much. Even someone who's specifically learning techniques for using the back edge, like me, looking at Fiore's kind of renewed attacks where you're coming up with the back edge to strike someone. You can do this with a rapier because they're all double-edged. Same with a side sword as well. However, even when you've been learning those techniques, if you can, you'll still typically just use the front edge because it's more instinctive. We've all got that monkey brain going on where, of course, yes, we're learning techniques, and this is part where people will go on about how martial arts are nonsense and blah blah, don't care. But yes, there is some element of truth in that. If you try to go too complicated with these techniques, it doesn't really work as often as you think. So yes, I would probably more cut with the front edge than the back. And this seems to be the right way round. There we are. See, I don't know who the manufacturer is. It's interesting, there's some chroming on this hilt, and that is in which I thought meant it was just steel. But looking at bits that have been scratched and dented, and on the insides of the threading and fittings, there's actually a yellow look, and I have a feeling that these are actually fittings made of brass. However, they've just put chrome on the outside, because if you think about a chrome sink, or if you think of a fitting that's been chromed, like on a car or a sink or wherever, even if it's made of steel and it's got that chromium on the outside, the chromium is what gives this smooth, bright, shiny colour to it. So you could actually put this visual colour on any metal, or even on plastic if you should so wish to use such disgusting materials. But I have a strong feeling this is actually chromed brass, which is interesting. Although it looks like it hasn't taken many hits, very few at all actually, but it doesn't seem like it's deformed or dented or become significantly damaged from it. But it does look like this was the person who previously owned this blade was an aggressive person, because normally when you see a person like myself who does a lot of parrying, you see a lot of dents here on the lower half of the blade where they've been receiving blows, and then they, cut and thrust as a riposte. There are a small couple of bits here and there, but basically all of this latter half is completely chewed up. And it also seems like they don't cut towards the tip so much, because this area is fairly smooth. Gets a little bit more chewed up from here, and then it's completely chewed up around this bit. So this is the area they're usually going towards the centre of percussion. That is where they've been hitting a lot. Again, not quite like myself, I tend to use the edge of measure more. But it's very interesting having this. I'll probably get the drill with the with the wire brush head to polish this up, because it's a bit rusty and I feel like it could be restored, especially the blade. But it's not the worst sort of handled, but it's not my favourite either. It feels a bit bulky, and it's not just its back weight, I think it is also, there's something a bit gammy about its balance. And bearing in mind the person who owned this last, who gave it to me, got rid of it for free, because they were otherwise going to trash it, they're going to completely just throw it away. So they thought, well, at least give it to someone as a gift. So there we are. I hope that was interesting. We shall see more about perhaps the other blades that I obtained from him, which I also received, which would include this, which is a, what's the word, spadroon type of blade, almost. Well, actually it's more like an officer's sabre. Got the folding hilt there. Nice, quite heavy scabbard. And you've got this one, which is a recreation sabre steel hilt, steel scabbard, which is interesting. You can use that offensively and defensively as well as the blade. This one's a bit back-weighted, it's a bit bulky, and it's got a little bit of a rattle, but overall, not too bad. These are not the sorts of swords I would have purchased, but I got them for free, so why not? But yes, it's interesting looking at these and learning things, and I hope you learned something too from this discussion. And of course, I'm known as the Genie for a reason. You can chuck a whole load of comments, you can have like 57 different wishes and things, make requests. Obviously there are things I can and cannot do, but if you want something discussed, perhaps to do with rapiers, sabres, medieval swords, axes, if you want more test cutting, more reviews, just tell me and I will do my best to accommodate, okay? And that's it for today. It's been just coming up to half an hour of discussion, so I think that'll do. Ta-ra for now.